Americans have faced many difficult headlines in recent weeks. A mass shooting in an elementary school, the arrest of a man, as we mentioned, threatening to kill a member of the Supreme Court, and primetime hearings revisiting the dark day of January 6, 2021 on Capitol Hill. It is that kind of moment that puts political leadership to the test. Joining us now from Arkansas, Chair of the National Governors Association, Asa Hutchinson. Governor, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Always good to be with you, Brett.
January 6th committee this week revealed some of their findings in that primetime hearing. They played new clips from depositions of some of President Trump's inner circle.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull.
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
They suggest that the former president knew he had lost the 2020 election, but was still trying to hold on to power. What's your reaction to the hearing?
My reaction to the hearing is that it's an important review as to what happened on January 6th. I've always said we need to do this. This is not the most bipartisan effort in it, but it is a review that is important. Obviously, as they present the case, Americans see this and they want to hold the people who are responsible for the January 6th attack accountable. Now, the whole premise of the hearing is that President Trump is criminally responsible, and that's the case that they're trying to make. As Bill Barr has said, I think that is a heavy lift. I don't see the factual basis for that. You can make the case, and I would agree, that he's politically, morally responsible for much of what has happened. But in terms of criminal liability, I think the committee has a long way to go before they could establish that. I think the key thing politically is that the American public does not want us to focus on the past. It's an important review, but I think the Democrats make a mistake if they simply want to relitigate what they did in the impeachment. It's about the future always in solving problems. We have enough problems to address, and that's what the American people want us to focus on to a greater extent.
Yeah, you've said this, something like this before, in which you said it's important. Republicans have to make sure we are clear that President Trump did have some responsibility for that. Congresswoman Liz Cheney was a little bit more pointed on Thursday night about Republicans and their role. Take a listen.
I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
The Wall Street Journal put it this way: Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. The Wall Street Journal editorial board. So my question, Governor, is what's the future of the Republican Party on this and on Republican leadership?
Well, I hope that the future of the Republican Party is different than former President Trump's leadership. I hope we move in a different direction. I believe that what happened on January 6th is a lot at his feet. It was wrong for our country, and for him to continue to push that theory, I agree, is the wrong direction for the Republican Party. I think there's many Republicans that are looking for an off-ramp, new opportunities to find leadership in the future. Obviously, what President Trump, there's a lot of things that he did that were very good, that the base, and I agree with, but he got off track on January 6th, and that was a costly era for our democracy. And I agree with a lot of the comments. He has responsibility there. We need to make sure that's clear. I think Republicans need to do a lot of soul searching as to what is the right thing here, what is the right thing to say for our party and our democracy and our future, and not simply appeal to the basis instincts of some of our base.
Let's talk policy. Up on Capitol Hill, Senate negotiators are in the middle of trying to find some compromise on finalizing bipartisan agreement on a narrow set of goals for gun control proposals. Here's what they're looking at, we're told: enhanced school safety, federal support for mental health programs, state incentives for red flag laws, expansions to federal background checks, and raising the minimum purchasing age for an AR-15 or the like to 21. Arkansas's minimum age to purchase is currently at 18. There are no red flag laws. What about this effort on Capitol Hill, Governor?
Well, I applaud the senators for trying to look at this from a bipartisan way and find out, is there a narrow path that we can better protect our children? It's a discussion that we absolutely need to have, and I applaud them for doing it. As you know, I joined a letter from the National Governor Association to create a bipartisan review by governors, and part of it is to evaluate what's going to be coming out of the Senate, making comments, because the governors are going to be the ones to implement a mental health policy and strengthening that. That's going to be responsible for school safety. So I hope that there's some positive things that can come out of this. When you look at the age of 21 or 18, there's constitutional issues there, but that has to be a part of the discussion. But it's difficult. It's going to be a narrow path, but it's a conversation that is important, and the governors are willing to engage in that, and particularly look at what comes out of the Senate side.
Governor, we've seen Florida, Washington, Vermont, California, Illinois, and Hawaii all raise the age to purchase a long gun from 18 to 21. If there's no deal up on Capitol Hill federally, would you consider doing that in the state of Arkansas?
No, I would not, because you called it a long gun, and I believe that somebody that's 18 ought to be able to go out there and shoot ducks with a long gun and to be able to purchase that.
Do you want me to clarify it more? An AR-15 or?
Yeah, AR-15 style is something that should be part of the conversation versus simply a long gun. And that's the challenge that we face. First, a California federal judge struck that limitation down as unconstitutional. And then secondly, the definitions. And that's what you've got to really listen to each other and come down. But yes, the AR-15 style military weapons ought to be a part of the conversation in whether that should be raised to 21.
And to my point, if they don't do it here on Capitol Hill, you would consider the raising of the age from 18 to 21 on an AR-15 in Arkansas?
I haven't seen a definition that works yet, but we will look at that. But I think that what you're going to see coming out of the Senate is something that we need to respond to as governors, and I think that's how we would approach it.
Okay, moving to the economy quickly. Inflation hit another 4-decade high last month. Gas prices, as you know, continue to soar. Take a listen to what the president had to say about all that this week.
Today's inflation report confirmed what Americans already know. Putin's price hike is hitting America hard. Gas prices at the pump, energy and food prices account for half of the monthly price increases since May.
What do you make of the president's messaging and leadership on this issue?
Well, I listened to his remarks at the Port of Los Angeles, and they were, in fact, disappointing. He was engaging in blaming everyone from Senator Scott to Putin. He was blaming corporate America and really did not provide the leadership that is needed during this time. The Americans want a leader that will lay out the challenge that we face, what is the solutions and the direction we need to go, and what we're going to be looking at in October and November of this year. And so I thought the blame game is not presidential. I don't think it's what we needed. Arkansans right now are paying $500 more per month than they did in January of 2021 simply because of inflation. This hurts the pocketbook of hardworking Americans, and what we've heard so far is not sufficient. Energy is a big driver in this, gas prices, and that impacts our agriculture, that impacts our production in every commodity, really. And that's where this president has failed us in an effective energy policy that America produces and is independent.
Governor Hutchinson, thanks for your time this morning.
Good to be with you, Brett. Thank you.